On a very superficial level, yet indeed a lively contemporary controversy among professing Christians, is the question of speaking in tongues. One side says that those who have never had the experience cannot judge of the matter. The other side says that experience is not the criterion. We must rather judge experience by the Bible. Beyond the range of professing Christians, David Hume rejected miracles, and in particular, Christ's resurrection, on the basis of experience. Schleiermacher, early last century, initiated modernism by insisting that all doctrines must be tested by experience. This raises the fundamental problem of apologetics. When one says, I believe in the resurrection, or I believe in tongues, or even I believe in God, the non-Christian will ask, how do you know? This is true in physics and geology also. If someone asserts a law of physics or proposes a geological explanation of Yosemite, his colleagues will ask, how do you know? They want to examine his methods. They want to see his criteria for knowledge. Theories concerning the criteria for knowledge are, in technical language, called epistemology. When a scientist or an historian asserts that he knows something, his statement is not acceptable unless he explains how he came to know it. How do you know is the last question to be asked, and epistemology is the first subject to be established. Some devout Christians do indeed accept an empirical epistemology. My very orthodox Lutheran friend, John Warwick Montgomery, you all know him, do you? You've heard him lecture. He's a very clever lecturer. Oh, he's very interesting. I wasn't being derogatory. You know, he's brilliant, except he's wrong. My very orthodox Lutheran friend, John Warwick Montgomery, thinks we can achieve theological knowledge by simply reading it off historical events. A liberal like G. Ernest Wright also thinks this possible, but he reads off a vastly different theology. This lecture now aims to show that epistemology is basic to apologetics, and second, that empiricism is totally unsatisfactory. In the Middle Ages, during the 13th century, Thomas Aquinas substituted the empiricism of Aristotle for the so-called Christian Platonism of Augustine. Although Aquinas tried to make metaphysics the basic subject and thus reverse the position Augustine had given to epistemology, even so, Aquinas had to acknowledge that the crucial question came in epistemology. Instead of recognizing that God had endowed mankind with an original or a priori intellectual equipment, Aquinas held that man's mind started as an empty blank, and all his knowledge began in sensory experience. I don't know whether Aquinas originated the phrase tabula rasa. I doubt that anybody before him used it, but I just don't know. I'm not sure. But I do know that he used it. You will find it in his text, the Latin text, that the mind at birth is a tabula rasa, a clean sheet, nothing written on it, absolutely without a priori equipment, blank mind, on which the experiences of sensation write themselves and are the basic elements of knowledge. In modern times, Schleiermacher, with certain modifications I cannot take time to explain in this lecture, Schleiermacher introduced religious experience or empiricism into Protestantism. Religion was to be based on experience. In effect, this eliminated theology in favor of the psychology of religious experience. Now, Schleiermacher apparently wished to retain a semblance of doctrinal orthodoxy, but his followers employed experience more and more consistently, dropping one doctrine after another, until Schleiermacher's modernism became 20th century humanism. And if you wish to read the history of this development from Schleiermacher to modern humanism, Edwin Burt has a book called Types of Religious Philosophy, and his account of the history of it is better in the first edition than the second. He may improve the second in other ways, but he dropped out the history by which he traced the development of American modernism from Schleiermacher into the humanism in which you find it today, or at least earlier in the century. And that's a very good chapter to read. It's near the end of the book. The chapter heading is probably From Modernism to Humanism or something like that. And it deals a good deal with the Chicago theology that began around the First World War, maybe a little before, and continued for a time. And I'm trying to think of one of the men who defined God. I have such trouble with names. I can remember Plato and Aristotle, but I can't remember the names of very many Americans, and so I forget. But anyhow, it's a good historical. Of course, Burt is a humanist, but his historical account of the development from modernism to humanism is a very good historical account. For this reason, it is not effective strategy to defend one doctrine after another. Frontline fighting is essential, but it is doomed to defeat unless the enemy's central facilities of production are bombed out of existence. Therefore, we must oppose not only the psychology of religious experience, but the central issue of empiricism as a whole. Empiricism is the theory that all knowledge depends on sensory perception. Thomas Aquinas, many Lutherans, unfortunately, and even some Calvinists have advocated this epistemology. But its chief exponents have been secularists like David Hume, Karl Marx, Bertrand Russell, and more recently the logical positivists with their slashing attack on metaphysics and theology. Some contemporary evangelicals, indeed some of my very good friends, support empiricism and claim that my arguments to the contrary merely repeat ancient Greek skepticism. This cavalier treatment must face a twofold reply. First, to say that an argument comes from a Greek skeptic does not refute the argument. A mere denial is never a refutation. What these evangelicals should do is to show precisely how the arguments are fallacious.